The Baltimore Orioles have won another huge game against an AL wildcard contender. This time, they take down the White Sox on Tuesday night. I'll recap the win, plus we'll learn more about two of the pitchers the Orioles selected on the third day of the MLB Draft in Zack Showalter and Graham Firoved. But that's all coming up on this episode of the Locked On Orioles podcast.
You are Locked On Orioles, your daily Baltimore Orioles podcast. Part of the Locked On Podcast Network, your team every day.
Hey there, Orioles fans. Today is Wednesday, August 24th, 2022, and welcome back in to the Locked On Orioles podcast, part of the Locked On Podcast Network, your team every day. As always, I'm your host, Connor Newcomb. And coming up on today's episode, we're going to start with an Orioles win as they take down the White Sox on Tuesday night. I'll recap that one, get you the 5 things you need to know from the game. Then we will continue our Orioles 2022 MLB Draft Profile Series. We're going to learn about 2 pitchers the Orioles took on the third day of the draft. First, we're going to be joined by Vinny Cervino, who covers high school baseball and the draft for Perfect Game. He's going to tell us about Orioles' 11th round of the right-handed pitcher Zack Showalter and what Cervino saw out of him in his high school days. And then at the end of the pod, Evan Hughes is going to join us. He's the play-by-play voice of Virginia Tech baseball to talk about Orioles' 16th round pick, the fire-throwing right-handed reliever Graham Firoved. But that's all coming up on this episode of the Locked On Orioles podcast. Before we get there, just want to thank you for making Locked On Orioles your first podcast listen of the day. We're free and available on all podcast listening platforms. Of course, we're right here on the Locked On Orioles YouTube page as well. Make sure to like, comment, and subscribe to the page. Couldn't be doing this without you, the listener. So thank you so much for making Locked On Orioles your first listen of the day. And for your first podcast listen today, we start with an Orioles victory. Final score from Oriole Park at Camden Yards on Tuesday night in Game 1 of a 3-game series. Orioles 5 and White Sox 3 as the O's take the opener in really the game where, if you looked at this series and you looked at the pitching matchups, you're thinking, all right, the O's are playing another wild card contender. The goal is take 2 out of 3, win the series. You probably would have chalked up AL Cy Young favorite Dylan Cease versus Austin Voth as the loss. But instead, that ends up being the win. And it got the Orioles to 64 and 58, ties the season high at 6 games over 500. Now, as I record this just shy of 11 p.m. Eastern time on Tuesday night, the Rays blew out the Angels. The Red Sox are blowing out the Blue Jays. So the O's will remain 3 games back of the Rays, 2.5 back of Toronto. It looks like the Astros are going to beat the Twins, so the O's will gain a little more room ahead of Minnesota. They're now going to be a game and a half ahead of the Twins. And then a game just getting started between the Nationals and the Mariners is scoreless in the third. If the Nats could win that, the O's would be a game and a half back. I don't think that's going to happen because the Nats are terrible. So let's just assume the O's kind of just keep pace and stay 2.5 back heading into play on Wednesday. But I'm going to get you the 5 things you need to know from the Orioles' 5-3 win over the White Sox on Tuesday night. And the first thing you need to know is that the big swing in this game came off the bat of Ryan Mountcastle, and boy, did he need that one against one of the best starters in the American League in the right-hander Dylan Cease. And Mountcastle got the job done. Orioles got runners on first and third with 1 out in the bottom of the first. They were already trailing 2-0 after the White Sox got a 2 spot in the top of the first inning off of Austin Voth. And Mountcastle delivered. He had a really good AB. He took a borderline 2-1 fastball that a lot of times he would have chased, but he laid off and made it a 3-1 pitch. And then he got a pitch in the middle of the zone, and it did not disappoint. Hanging pitch, Mountcastle takes it out to straightaway center field, 106 off the bat, a 420-foot 3-run homer for Ryan Mountcastle, his 18th of the year, put the Orioles up 3-2 in the first inning. And the O's just made Dylan Cease work in that first inning, got the 3 runs off him, made him throw 30-plus pitches. And Cease had one of his worst starts of the year, ended up going just 5 1/3, 4 runs, only 3 hits, 4 Ks, 3 walks, and that home run, and, had to be lifted after 93 pitches in the 6th inning. And Dylan Cease, who dominated the Orioles when they saw him last time back in Chicago in late June, he just put things together in that start. And this one just couldn't get the strikeouts. 4 strikeouts, one of the lowest outputs for Cease all year. The Orioles had good ABs, and Mountcastle had the big one right there because Ryan Mountcastle has struggled in the second half. He's hitting only .211 with a .380 slugging percentage in the month of August so far, but he's got a couple of home runs now in his last 4 games. So hopefully that is leading him in the right direction. Second thing you need to know from this one is Adley Ruchman, even without getting a hit in this game, just continues to be incredible to watch at the plate. Now, he walked in each of his first 2 plate appearances against Cease in the first and third innings, but that first inning walk kind of changed this game a little bit. I mean, the Orioles are down 2-0. Cedric Mullins leads off the game, first pitch, bunt single down the third baseline. And then Adley comes up against Dylan Cease and just works this incredible walk where he goes behind in the count 1-2 and just continues to fight back, ends up working an 8-pitch walk, took a borderline pitch that was just high on 3-2, was able to check his swing to get the walk down to first base. And it was just a beauty to watch Cease, who's been one of the best pitchers in the American League, and Ruchman, who's been one of the best hitters in the American League since, the All-Star break. And it was an awesome battle. Adley wins it with a walk. It sets up the Orioles. Santander then hit a fly ball to the track in right field that got it to first and third, and then Mountcastle delivered after that with the 3-run homer. But it was Ruchman who got that pitch count up early on Dylan Cease, made him work in that first inning, got a walk in the third as well. He continues to be a master, and Adley Ruchman now with 43 walks since he's come up in mid-May has taken over sole possession of the team lead. Anthony Santander second with 41, but Ruchman with the 2 walks on Tuesday already has the team lead in walks. Just an incredible batter's eye from the Orioles rookie catcher. Third thing you need to know from this one is that Austin Voth, the Orioles starter, certainly did not have his best stuff. And, the Christmas of the fastball and the curveball just wasn't what we've seen at times this year since the O's claimed it. But that almost didn't matter for Austin Voth on Tuesday, because after a rough start to this game, he allowed a leadoff single, and then Eloy Jimenez hits a 2-run homer in the top of the first, and 3 batters in, the White Sox lead it 2-0 with just 1 out in the first against Austin Voth. You're thinking, oh no, things are going to come crashing down. Well, then all of a sudden, he didn't necessarily lock it down, but he put up zeros, and Voth's final line ended up being 5 2/3 innings with just those 2 runs allowed on 7 hits. Struck out 3 and walked 3 with the 1 homer, 93 pitches, and Voth with a 2.7 ERA now as an Oriole after he had a 10+ ERA with the Nationals. And listen, he didn't, again, have the best stuff. 10 hard hit balls by White Sox hitters against Voth in this one. He had 2 runners on base in the 3rd, 4th, and 5th innings and escaped each inning with a 0 up on the board. He just did his job. And again, the stuff wasn't nearly as crisp. He wasn't getting his usual swings and misses. I mean, at the end of the day, he got 9 whiffs. But what was interesting with Voth is that he was very curveball heavy in this start. He threw 35 curveballs, 34 four-seamers, and then 24 cutters, although some of them seemed to be that sweeper slider. But the curveball was his number 1 pitch. He got 5 whiffs on it. It wasn't its best, but it was still solid because he just didn't seem to have his usual fastball command, and he still got through 5 2/3 against a pretty good White Sox lineup. I mean, it just continues to be what a waiver claim by the Orioles and what a job Chris Holt and his staff have done with Austin Voth. Fourth thing you need to know from this one is that I think since the trade deadline, this game Tuesday night was the most glaring example of the Orioles missing Jorge Lopez in their bullpen, because I get it. Felix Bautista, we'll talk about in a second, has been amazing, and he's filled in perfectly in the closer role for Jorge Lopez. But you're late inning high leverage guys, that's not your whole bullpen. And when you trade a guy like Jorge Lopez, even if you have a closer who you think is as good, if not better, in Bautista to replace him in that role, everybody behind him moves up a role. And then you have to, of course, bring up a guy from AAA to fill in that final spot in the bullpen. And your bullpen gets a little worse and it has less depth moving forward. And we saw that rear its ugly head almost on Tuesday night. After Austin Voth leads the game after 5 2/3, Brian Baker comes in and gets the final out of the 6th inning. And then Dylan Tate in the 7th gets 2 outs, couldn't quite get out of the inning. Cionel Perez comes in, a hit and a walk, makes it a 4-3 game. He does get out of the inning. And then really where you saw it show up was, the O's love Cionel Perez, but there were a lot of big righties in that White Sox order. So they wanted to go to a high leverage righty. They had already used Dylan Tate and Brian Baker in this game. You're basically out of your best righties. So they had to go to Joey Crable. Now he started off the eighth inning. Orioles were leading 5-3 in the top of the eighth. And, he does get the 8 and 9 hitters to start the inning. And while he started the eighth with an out, then he allowed back-to-back base runners. And Joey Crable leads the game after a double and a single, first and third with one out. And you just saw, he struggled recently. He's just not ready for that high leverage eighth inning role. So, the O's have to turn it over to Felix Bautista to try and get his first ever 5-out save. And that's going to wear on Bautista, and it's going to wear on the rest of the bullpen. They're going to need somebody else to step up. I can see Brian Baker. He's pitched better lately, probably moving into more of a high leverage role. Dylan Tate's going to pitch a lot. Ciano Perez is going to have to get more righties out. But this bullpen is going to be tested, and they really missed Jorge Lopez on Tuesday night. But the fifth and final thing that you need to know from the O's 5-3 win is that, well, Felix Bautista just made all of it okay. No matter how much the staff missed Jorge Lopez, he made it all okay. He comes in the eighth inning with runners on the corners and one out, and the Orioles leading 5-3, and just absolutely goes to work. Strikes out the red-hot Luis Robert on 3 pitches that were just nasty. Gets ahead of Eloy Jimenez, 0-2, ends up hitting him on a 1-2 fastball, but regroups himself with the bases loaded, goes 3-2 to Jose Abreu, one of the best hitters in baseball, and strikes him out on a high fastball at 101 out of the zone. It was an awesome K for Felix Bautista, but the Orioles offense didn't add in the bottom of the eighth, so he had to come back out there in the ninth and get 3 more outs. And, well, all he did was go 1-2-3 in the ninth with another strikeout of Andrew Vaughn. His first ever 5-out save. It was an inning and 2/3 with the 3 Ks, no walks, no hits, did hit the batter and had to throw 27 pitches, but Bautista just went out there and shut the door again. And what a find he has been for the Orioles, just turning him into the guy he has been. And it wasn't his usual amount of whiffs, just 4 swings and misses on 27 pitches, but he got the job done. The fastball velo was up. He actually threw a pitch. Now, I believe this was the pitch that went to the backstop in the eighth inning, but he threw a pitch at 103.1 miles an hour. That's a ridiculous velocity. And Bautista did it, and he's just getting so fun to watch close out games for the Orioles. And he closes out another win here as the O's take the opener 5-3 over the White Sox. But moving on to the minor league levels for the Orioles, wanted to continue our 2022 Orioles MLB Draft Profile Series here on the pod. Today, we're going to learn about 2 of the pitchers, 2 right-handed pitchers that the Orioles took on the final day of the draft back in July. So next up, you're going to hear from Vinny Cervino. He works for Perfect Game, covering high school baseball and the draft, and he's going to tell us about Zack Showalter, the 11th round pick of the Orioles this year, a right-handed pitcher out of high school in Florida. We're going to talk about his funky delivery, his big fastball, and how he projects as he gets older. And then coming up after Vinny, we're going to hear from Evan Hughes. He's the play-by-play voice of Virginia Tech baseball. He's going to tell us about the right-handed pitcher Graham Firoved, who the Orioles took in the 16th round this year, was a high-leverage reliever for Virginia Tech with an elite fastball, some good stuff on the hill. We'll talk about his future in the Orioles bullpen. That's all coming up next with some draft talk here on the pod. But first, picture this. You're hanging out with some friends and putting back a few drinks. A few becomes a few too many. And as the evening comes to an end and people start to head out, you think of calling for a ride. But nah, you live nearby. You can make it home okay. It's no big deal. What are the odds you'll get pulled over anyway? And even so, what's the worst that could happen? Your insurance goes up, you lose your license, you lose your job, total your car, you kill someone. Everyone knows about the risks of drunk driving. The results are tragic and often deadly. However, that doesn't stop everyone from getting behind the wheel while under the influence. That's why police officers are out there right now looking for impaired drivers on our roads to save lives. So if you think you're okay to drive after a few drinks, think again. Play it safe and plan ahead to get a ride. It only takes one mistake to change your life or someone else's forever. Drive sober or get pulled over. All right, so we welcome Vinny Cervino into the podcast, a national cross-checker at Perfect Game who covers the MLB Draft, covers some high school baseball, and has gotten to see Zack Showalter throw a few times over the past year or so, the Orioles' 11th round draft selection. And Vinny, first of all, thank you so much for hopping on the podcast.
Yeah, thanks for having me.
And so we have you on to talk about Showalter, as I mentioned, the right-handed pitcher who the Orioles took out of high school in the 11th round out of Florida. in this 2022 draft. He was committed to the University of South Florida, but ended up signing with the Orioles. So I think of, what video that Orioles fans and that I saw of Showalter, what I first saw is the breaking stuff looked pretty nasty, at least for an 18-year-old. I just kind of wanted to get your impressions of, someone who 4, 5, 6 times saw him pitch live.
Yeah, Showalter is really interesting to me, and it's unsurprising like a team that the Orioles would draft him and potentially have a lot of room to kind of play with that profile. The breaking ball has actually been kind of inconsistent over the course of his career. At its best, it's like a 74, 75, 76 mile an hour sweeper with a lot of horizontal life. But I've actually had this conversation with a scout friend of mine before, talking about him specifically. I just think that Showalter is such an alien fastball. It's such a very unique fastball quality with a super low release height and gets a ton of carry up in the strike zone. I think it's one of those pitches that, most of the spring he was probably around 88, 92, touch a little bit higher early on. But I think even if that velo takes up a little bit, you could be talking about a 70 grade fastball just in terms of the quality and the components there.
Yeah, you talk about the alien fastball. Does some of that have to do with, it's not like the windup and delivery are, some sort of crazy problem or issue, but it's distinct when you watch him pitch and how much of that, goes into his fastball and its life. And do you think scouts or anyone saw the delivery as an issue versus, kind of a perk for getting a player like him?
Yeah, I think it's one of those things that it varies a little bit because there's so many different factors that go into it, right? Because I think at the end of the day, what you're really trying to determine when you're talking about pitchers is A, what's the stuff going to be long-term? And B, is this going to be a starter or reliever? And I think with most guys, including Showalter, who I think is like just recently turned 18 right before the draft, so he's younger for the grade. Even if the delivery can be a little funky or deceptive, I think it does definitely aid in creating some deception on the fastball. But I think it's one of those things that like he could be a starter or a reliever. It's really too soon to know. He started out actually when he was younger in high school. He's a primary outfielder, secondary pitcher. So he's still kind of new to this. He's still fairly new when you look at the other arms that are in the amateur side, collegiate and high school wise.
Yeah, we talked the fastball, we talked the breaking ball. Was there any changeup that you saw or anything else that was in the repertoire for him?
He would flash a changeup every so often, but I don't think he was very comfortable with it. I don't doubt his ability though, obviously. Really good athlete, and that's one of those things that like player development is going to be a wonder for you when it comes to a third pitch, fourth pitch, fifth pitch, and not only that, but sequencing and stuff. And it's one of those, I think there's a lot to build with, a lot to like in terms of the athleticism, arm speed, and the current pitch mix that you can just add a ton of pitches there. You can add a lot of feel, and he should have a pretty high ceiling as he continues to fill out and develop and that sort of thing.
Yeah, the Orioles got him some extra money to sign. Obviously he was set to go play at USF, kind of the hometown school for him, and goes in the 11th round. And the O's get him. And the O's have been good developing changeups over the past couple of years since Mike Elias and his staff took over. So yeah, that's definitely something to look at for a guy who, maybe could continue to add to that pitch. But, when you're seeing him a lot, you're seeing him at these, either perfect game events or just these events with a lot of other talent around him. And I know in terms of the perfect game ratings, you guys had him third among right-handed pitchers in Florida, and there's so much talent in that state. In what events did he kind of stand out, or how much did he stand out versus the rest of the competition, whether it be, big time names he's facing in the batter's box or just, the other arms that were appearing in games around it?
Yeah. So early in the summer, kind of when that calendar turns over from the last draft to this new draft, there's obviously a lot of early preliminary stuff in terms of like showcases, tournaments, scout run stuff. And Showalter's name was very buzzy at the beginning of that process, that he could be one of the best arms in the state. And I think that kind of held true. As you mentioned in the perfect game rankings, we had him the third right-handed pitcher in the state of Florida. On our draft list, I think we had him in the third or fourth round-ish range. I don't recall exactly where it was, but right around kind of the money that he ended up getting. Down to the WWBA World Championship in Jupiter, he was really good. He pitched 2 relief outings, 4.2 innings with 7 strikeouts, only 2 walks and 1 hit allowed. All the strikeouts came through the fastball. Like I mentioned, really could pitch up in the zone with that pitch. And then this spring, he matched up in one of the more heavily scouted games that I attended. It was him against Ethan Petrie, another Florida high schooler who I believe is at South Carolina now. But they both matched up against each other. And so that was a pretty big performance for him on a pretty big stage with obviously a ton of people in attendance there.
Yeah. And we know with the MLB draft, you just mentioned third or fourth round, it's not the, straight up, how early you get picked. Like, for example, the NFL draft is. It's a lot about negotiations and money. But was there any surprise that, he was a day 3 guy? And some of that has to do with the fact that the Orioles were willing to give him more money, to be the first pick on the third day. But was there surprise that he didn't end up going earlier in this draft?
Yeah, I think like you mentioned, one of the things, like there's almost this like dissonance in your head that like, oh, if I think he's a third, fourth rounder and he gets third, fourth round money, he should probably go in the third, fourth round versus the 11th round, or even like another Orioles draft pick, Carter Young, getting 1.2 in the 17th. Like that's kind of crazy. But I think kind of the money range and like the round range, it kind of all fit the talent. I was a little bit shocked that nobody took a chance earlier. Especially, I think one of the central themes of this year's draft was one of those that high school pitchers seemed more signable than previously thought. When you look at rounds 1 and 2 and the comp rounds and stuff, there were a lot of guys that went that at least personally I was a little bit surprised went or signed for whatever amount of money they signed for, just based on kind of the intel and dope that I was hearing. So, but I think he's exactly the type of guy you want to get in the 11th as an overpay type. He's a guy that is a real upside play, like I've said before. Obviously, there's risk with high school arms, and the floor could be pretty substantial. But I mean, Showalter's fastball quality and his athleticism and everything, I think that's absolutely worth the bargain that they got there in the 11th.
Yeah, so we've talked about the stuff and the delivery and what you've seen from him. And this is so much of a harder question for a high school pitcher versus a college pitcher because way less data. He's much younger. He's got much more time in the minors ahead of him. But when you look forward 4-ish years, which is going to be a long time, but when you look forward like that, it's again tough to do for an 18-year-old. But do you see reliever, with that, maybe fastball, breaking ball, the funky delivery, blowing it by guys, or do you see him being a starter whenever his hopefully big league days come with the Orioles?
I'm going to give you a cop out because I really don't like putting guys into reliever starter boxes, especially like you said, 18-year-old high schoolers. And like we talked about with the stuff and everything, he was a guy where he was in a position at a smaller high school up in Wesley Chapel, played for a good travel team, played in all the premier events and stuff, but never really had to use many pitches besides his fastball. He, in every start that I've seen from him and every performance really for that part, he's been a fastball heavy pitcher. It's a lot of fastballs, heavy usage fastball. The breaking ball has been inconsistent at times, but he'll show it a couple of times. And that was mostly it for a guy in high school ball that you're talking about. So there's obviously going to have to be a lot of strides made in terms of the pitch selection and adding to that repertoire. But like, I don't count him out. He's a super athletic 18-year-old. Like, I think it'd be irresponsible of me to say, oh, he's a reliever. Like, there's obviously a chance he can start. I think he could be probably a really good reliever. But it's one of those that 18-0, we'll see in 4 years, 5 years when, get to AA, the higher levels there, and kind of see what the Orioles have made him at that point.
And if he's just an athletic guy with a hoppy fastball, I mean, Spencer Strider might be the, rookie of the year in the National League. So guys can do that at the big league level as well. But Vinny, thank you so much for joining us, to tell us more about Zack Showalter, who the Orioles took to open the third day of the draft here in 2022. Let everybody know before we let you go, kind of where they can follow you as you continue to cover some of the best high school baseball players around the country.
Yeah, you can follow me at Cervino PG on Twitter. I tweet a lot about the guys I see. Me and Brian Skowski do all of our draft stuff for the most part. Drafts, college, basically anything you want, 18 and under, over on perfectgame.org. So I'll be all over there.
Well, thank you so much, Vinny, for joining us.
Thanks for having me.
So our thanks again to Vinny Cervino of Perfect Game for joining the podcast to tell us more about Zack Showalter, the right-hander who the Orioles took out of high school in Florida with their 11th round selection in this year's draft. Next up, we're going to have another guest talking about another pitcher the Orioles drafted. The pitcher is the 16th rounder, the right-hander Graham Firoved, and our guest is Evan Hughes. He is the play-by-play voice of Virginia Tech Hokies baseball, where Firoved pitched out of the bullpen for the last 2 years, and we will learn more about him with Evan in just a second. But first, got to tell you about betonline.net, the fastest and easiest way to check in on all your betting needs. You can find all your favorite sports and events at the #1 online source for odds, lines, and games. You can find news on every league. It's not just Major League Baseball, even as we go into the playoff push, but also with the NFL season and college football coming up. You got the NBA and the NHL right around the corner. And of course, every weekend there's combat sports, there's esports, and there's a golf tournament going on as well. And BetOnline continues to be the top online resource for all your sports wagering info, from live in-game betting, scores, and podcasts. They have you covered. So head to BetOnline today or use your mobile device to learn more about the action happening today at BetOnline, where the game starts. All right, so we welcome Evan Hughes into the podcast. He is the play-by-play voice of Virginia Tech baseball, along with the women's basketball team and assistant director of broadcast services down there in Blacksburg. And Evan, first of all, thank you so much for hopping on the podcast.
Yeah, thanks so much for having me, Connor. Appreciate it.
Yeah, and so we have you on to talk about Graham Firoved, who the Orioles have added to the bullpen ranks in the minor leagues with their 16th round selection, taking the right-hander out of Virginia Tech in this year's draft. And I think first question we got to get to for Graham is, although he was, such a great reliever for really a couple years for Virginia Tech, it was only 5 saves picked up. So kind of what was his role in the Hokies bullpen over the last 2 seasons?
Yeah, John Sheff and the philosophy of Virginia Tech and pitching coach Ryan Fecteau, they don't like to label anybody in the back end of its bullpen. Firoved this past year was truly the first guy out of the pen in a Friday game. I think you saw this year the Hokies, who won 9 of its 10 ACC series, they won a lot of Friday games. I'm pretty sure they won 8 of the 10 Friday games in ACC series. So there was a lot of emphasis put on winning that first game. And he was a great combination with Griffin Green, who was the starter, and then he would typically follow out of the pen. And then down the stretch in late April and May, we saw Firoved be the only reliever that would make multiple appearances in a weekend. And it started at Virginia. The Hokies got its first ever road series win in Charlottesville in program history since joining the ACC. So yes, only 5 saves, but he was asked to do many different things, whether it was to get out of high pressure situations, whether it was to go over 4 innings to clinch the ACC regular season championship against Duke. He wore different hats, so to speak, in the bullpen this year for Tech. And I think that's what made him the most valuable reliever, is that he could do a lot of different things for the Hokies.
Yeah, we'll get into, more on his role and his stuff in a second, but I did want to ask, if you had any insight in talking to him or whatever it may be about kind of his journey, because he starts at Radford, literally the school right next to Virginia Tech. And then, things for whatever reason don't work out there. He goes to, a great JUCO down at Northwest Florida State, plays in a couple games, COVID comes, that season gets cut short. And then basically, comes back almost to Radford, except the next door neighbor, and to Virginia Tech. So I wonder if you had any insight onto, what that process was like for him to end up being at 3 schools in his 4 years.
I do a weekly podcast with Tech coaches and players, and we had over 60 guests last year. And one of my favorite guests we had all year was Graham, because to your point of his story, a lot of times people go to a JUCO, right? And they're looking all across the country. And he literally made a decision to come to the school that's 15 minutes down I-81, to your point, Radford, Virginia Tech being so close. But, it's fun. It's funny talking with Coach Sheff about when Virginia Tech played Radford in 2019. Firoved pitched against the Hokies, and Coach Sheff kind of made a mental note that he had really good stuff, and they followed him when he went into the transfer portal and kept tabs on him. And Graham said that going to JUCO, as you hear from a lot of people, it's an experience, right? I mean, he mentioned to me that there were a lot of times just kind of playing video games in his dorm by himself, and it gave him an opportunity to really focus on himself and kind of hone in on his craft. And he's from Virginia Beach, so he's got Virginia ties, and then ended up coming back to Virginia Tech. And really, when he got here in 2021, and I can remember him pitching in some high leverage situations against North Carolina early in March. So, I think he knew people on the Tech roster. It made sense for him being in the state of Virginia. But what's impressive is sometimes those guys that come from a JUCO, it takes a year or 2 to maybe acclimate to a Power 5, a conference like Virginia ACC. And he was one of the top relievers in 2021 and really kind of picked right up where he left off in 2021 this season.
So I wanted to ask about the stuff because I did watch him a bit in the regional that the Hokies hosted this year, and it's some electric stuff out of the back end of the bullpen. But what's he kind of thrown in there to get hitters out once he comes into a game?
I think he had the most electric pitch of any pitcher on this Tech team this year, and it's all about his fastball, Connor. He's got a unique arm slot with how he throws it, coming up a little bit high. And I had a great conversation with pitching coach Ryan Fecto about it. In the game of softball, a main pitch that pitchers throw is a rise ball, right? Doesn't exist in baseball. But if there could be a similarity, it would be Graham Fireved's fastball. It's got a ton of movement on it. And when he throws it belt high up in the zone to hitters, it just moves at the last second up. And I think that's why he can throw it so many times and rely on it so heavily like he does, is because of the movement that it has on it. It is such an electric pitch. And my favorite thing about Graham is that he's got a really good breaking ball, but he does not show it often. And every now and then he pulls the string and just, kind of fools a hitter with it. So he's got 3 pitches, but I'd say, 80% of what he's throwing, at least in college, his fastball was so good this year that it could beat just about anybody, which was just so fun to watch because you knew it was coming and hitters just struggled to make adjustments with it.
Yeah, and what does velocity look like on that pitch and even on the slider or the breaking ball as well if you have it?
Yeah, I think it's about 92 to 9. I think he topped out about 93. I think he can get it up to 94, 95 on a good day, but he was very consistent with it. And then, that slider pitch, it was huge. I can remember so many times he came into bases loaded situations, specifically against Pittsburgh early. He came in bases loaded, no outs, and retired the top of the lineup, got out without any runs. So one thing I'm curious to see in the next level is how much does he rely on his fastball as he goes to pro ball? Does he start to mix in that breaking ball pitch even more? So that's kind of, I think, the next thing for him. But I tell you what, again, there's some really good hitters in the ACC, and that fastball just proved to be powerful. So I hope it continues to be his bread and butter pitch because from a broadcaster's perspective, it's just super fun to watch.
Yeah, and the one other thing I wanted to get to is, you talk about his 2021 season and he had good numbers there and he had some insane strikeout numbers, about 16 per 9, but he was basically a 1 inning max guy in 2021. Yeah. Whereas this year, he throws 51 innings in 27 appearances. Now the strikeout numbers went down a little bit. They were still great, but his walks went down as well with more innings, which was obviously a big thing for him to have. So when you look at him, clearly the O's see him as a reliever at the next level just because that's what he's been. But, can you see him continuing kind of the role he had this year where, if you bring a guy in the 6th inning like Firoved, he can get you to the 8th like he did multiple times with the Hokies?
I really do. And again, I think one thing that's going to serve him so well is that he's had to play multiple roles on different teams in different seasons for Virginia Tech, right? So if you ask him to come in and get you a hold, he can do that. Can he bridge it to a back-end guy in the bullpen? I think he absolutely can. I think what he proved this year, Connor, is that he can be effective for multiple innings. I also think, though, because his stuff can be so electric, he could be a guy that's just a 1-inning guy, right, that could come into some high-leverage situations. But, I think back specifically to, I think where he really proved that, mentioned the Virginia series where he pitched on a Friday and a Sunday, threw like 40 pitches on a Friday, and then came back multiple innings on Sunday and was just as good on Sunday, if not better than he was on Friday. But, regular season finale against Duke, a lot on the line. Tech has never won an ACC regular season title before. Big rain delay for 2 hours. So they come back in the 5th inning, and Firoved comes in and closes out the game and went the distance, which typically you never see him go longer than 3 innings, but he was hot that day, and I think he went 4 1/3. So I think that the Orioles and the organization, they're going to have their options with Graham, and I don't think he's just labeled as this is what I do. I think he can do multiple different things, which is great.
And it's exciting to have in the Orioles player development and their pitching staffers throughout the organization love to get guys where they can identify at least one elite thing with any pitcher they bring in. And of course, it is that fastball for Firoved, and then they can go from there. But Evan, thank you so much for joining us and telling us more about Graham Firoved. Should be fun to watch him. And the one thing is, with college relievers who have had, 3-4+ years in, the college ranks, they can usually move up fairly quick because they're already kind of set in that role. So we may see him getting close to Baltimore sooner than later. But thanks again for joining us.
Thanks so much for having me, and best of luck to the O's. What a fun year they're having.
So our thanks again to both of our guests on today's episode, Vinny Cervino of Perfect Game, for talking about Zack Showalter. First of all, Showalter, the high school righty, it's that deception with the arm angle. The fastball is a really good pitch, and he's got a lot of upside at just 18 years old. Orioles get him into the system out of high school. It's going to be cool to see what their pitching development staff can do with him. And then our thanks to Evan Hughes, the play-by-play voice of Virginia Tech baseball, for joining us to talk about Graham Firoved. And, the reason I kind of put these two guys together and their draft profiles in one episode is because they're both guys who the fastball just really plays up with a lot of late life. It is by far their best pitch, and two guys who I could both see being big time back end of the bullpen guys when they get to the big leagues. Now, as we talked about with Firoved, I think it's pretty much set he's a reliever. Showalter certainly could be a starting pitcher moving forward. I mean, he's only 18. As Vinny talked about, you don't want to put him into a box at this point, but two right-handed pitchers with really good fastballs who the Orioles selected on day 3 of the draft this year, and two exciting prospects to get into the Orioles system. Excited to watch them kind of continue in their pro debuts here for the finality of the minor league season here in 2022. Before we go on this episode, though, did want to get you just a couple of Orioles news and notes on some injured pitchers who, are hopefully going to help the Orioles, or maybe not, but have a chance to help the Orioles down the stretch. The first one is Alexander Wells. He actually is off of his rehab assignment. He is in AAA now, pitching for the Norfolk Tides. And, he's a couple of appearances back in AAA after he had that elbow injury all the way back in April that shut him down for a while. He was pitching a bit in the majors early this year with the Orioles, was pitching in September of last year as well. And I don't think Wells comes up to the Orioles at all this year. I mean, there's options above him like Bruce Zimmerman and Matt Harvey, and obviously DL Hall, who would get the call back to the big leagues at first, but good to see him healthy. But the two bigger names, obviously, number one is Tyler Wells, who on Tuesday through his first bullpen session since going down with that injury really over a month ago now. And Wells said that he felt great. And hopefully that means that sometime in September, we will see Tyler Wells return back to the Orioles rotation. Obviously, that would be a huge, huge boost to the Orioles right now, because Wells, I mean, you can make a strong argument that when he was healthy before the injury, he was probably the Orioles' best starting pitcher at that point. So, I mean, it's going to be huge to potentially get him back. And then there's big Grayson Rodriguez news, as Grayson Rodriguez is set to throw another bullpen session this week. This reported by many of the beat reporters and announced by the Orioles, including Zach Silver of MLB.com. He's going to throw bullpen session. He's going to throw live batting practice, and he's going to throw a sim game this week, which are all just huge steps forward for Rodriguez. And, again, I think this points us towards the fact that it looks like he's going to, at the very least, pitch in AAA maybe before the end of the season. But I wouldn't be crazy surprised if Grayson Rodriguez can pitch in the big leagues with the Orioles by the end of this year. It's going to be interesting to see if it plays out that way. Now, one thing, if you're wondering, could Grayson pitch in the postseason? You have to be on the 40-man roster before September 1st to be eligible for the postseason. He is not currently on the Orioles 40-man roster. They do have to put him on this offseason. So it wouldn't be the worst decision to just plop him on the 40-man on August 30th or something, sometime this week, just in case he can get back for the end of the year and you want him for the postseason. But we will certainly see, and we could see him in the big leagues here in late September. But a guy we were obviously waiting to see in the big leagues, we were hoping yesterday, was Gunnar Henderson, who was not in the Orioles lineup, was not called up. In fact, he was in Jacksonville with the Norfolk Tides and was in the Tides lineup for the AAA game on Tuesday night. We'll see. Hopefully, when I'm back here with you tomorrow, we're talking about Gunnar Henderson making his debut. Still a chance it happens this week, but we will keep our close eye on that as the podcast rolls on, and I'm back with you for tomorrow. But until then, I'm Connor Newcomb, and this has been the Locked On Orioles podcast, part of the Locked On Podcast Network. Your team every day.